So we are on part 2 of the testimony Flavium by Flavius Josephus. I left off telling you that it was commonly accepted by the scholars that the entire testimonium was a forgery. But in the 20th century, it was pushed back and it was made to be accepted by most mainstream scholars as genuine entirely or partially. But nevertheless, many scholars and historians and researchers and writers over the last century have held to the analysis that the testimonium in toto is an interpolation into the text by a later Christian hand. For example, it has remained my contention all along that the entire Testimonium Flavium was inserted into the surrounding passages in Josephus by a later Christian scribe, possibly a church father, and historian by guess what? The name Eusebius. Go figure. Arguments against this conclusion of entire interpolation have not been satisfactory, and I maintain that this assessment is the most scientific. So a study published in 2014 by a renowned linguist takes us right back to the critical analysis of the past centuries, which had concluded scientifically that the testimonium as a whole is a Christian forgery. The author of this study is a professor of humanities at Carnegie Mellon University, Dr. Paul J. Hopper, a longtime scholar who's been published peer-reviewed articles in journals for over 40 years. He is one of the pioneers who worked on the Proto-Indo-European linguistic theory, positing that Indian and European language derive from the same remote prehistoric root. So in reality, forgery and hoaxes have been rampant as concerns religious texts, artifacts, and relics in both pre-Christian and Christian times. Isn't that sad? We can't even trust the Christians. The cautionary tale, therefore, is that forgery has been common enough to warrant suspicion, especially when it comes to religious claims. I just posted, you guys, earlier today, all the religious claims about the blood of Jesus being found at the Ark of Covenant, the Noah's Ark being found in the mountains. I just posted a video debunking all of that. I mean, they even have videos on the internet of demons screaming under the ground by the Euphrates River. Come on, you guys. When is this going to stop? So this part is very interesting. It actually goes along with a book I purchased called Christ Before Jesus. I actually have the first autographed one by Matthew Britt and Jaron Wingo. They're the ones who did the stylometric analysis of the text in the New Testament. Well, here, if you read this paper that's in academia.edu, it shows here that conservative mainstream places the composition of the biblical book of Acts of the Apostles at the end of the 1st century. There is no historical literary evidence for its existence until the end of the 2nd century, at which point the Antiochian patriarch Theophilus himself defines the word Christian. From the scientific evidence we currently possess, the word is apparently a late invention. Moreover, the evidence points to the appropriate biblical term as Christian, not Christian. In this regard, if we look at the Codex Sinaiticus, which is Acts 11:26, one of the earliest extant manuscripts of the Bible, dating to the 4th century, we can see that the original word is Christians with an E, erased and replaced by an I to say Christian instead of Christian. So the same Christian to Christian substitution has happened with the other two passages in the New Testament containing the word Christian in Acts 26:28 and 1 Peter 4:16. These are both quite obviously late books, as 1 Peter likewise does not emerge clearly in the historical literary record until after the middle of the 2nd century, appearing now and then in the extant literary record of the last couple of centuries before the Common Era and into the 1st century AD/CE. The word Christian is a moniker related to the popular epithet Christos, the good or useful. So, one of the earliest known churches, that of the Marcionites at Deir Ali, Syria, we find the phrase Jesus the Christos rather than Jesus the Christ. So this part here is saying in the testimonium, when it says Christians, if it was original to Josephus in the time and the era, the word would have been Christians with an E, not with an I. So because the E was crossed out and an I was put in it, it makes it very suspicious that it was edited or forged. So there are differences in the language of the testimonium Flavianum and other 3 episodes that were written in the pilot sequence that suggest that they are not the same author. So though it has been proven that parts of the text are genuinely Josephian, the text has been tampered with by later Christians wanting to erase scandalous content. So the conclusion is, there's reason to suspect that the Jesus episode is a later insertion in Josephus's writings, dating from more than 200 years after Josephus's death, and probably absent from most manuscripts of the Jewish antiquities until even later. To summarize, Hopper concludes that the Testimonium Flavianum, as a whole, is an interpolation from the 4th century at the earliest. So the suggestion of an early 4th century composition of the Testimonium Flavianum might implicate against the most famous Christian author of the time, Eusebius, as its composer and interpolator, who was also one of the creators of the Nicene Creed. Go figure. Eusebius is the first to mention the Testimonium, and he was in a position of power to make sure his copy of Antiquities with it would be the one used to manufacture others. As a major church figure and servant of Constantine in Rome, Eusebius had vast resources behind him to make this alteration happen, possibly more than anyone else of the time. You see, he's saying here that Eusebius, if he was likely the one who forged it, was embarrassed at the lack of writings that he had about Jesus in all of his writings that he had. I mean, he had a lot of text, Josephus did, but he didn't write about Jesus, but this one spot here that they believe was forged, and it was actually considered a forgery until the 20th century. So evidently there was a man called Justus of Tiberias, and he wrote a history in this period that conflicted with Josephus and claimed Josephus's version to be self-serving. Well, Justus's work has not survived, but we know from other sources that he wrote in Greek detail about the exact period of Tiberius's reign that coincided with Jesus's ministry, and he did not mention Jesus at all. So outside of the Gospels, there is no independent contemporary account of these events. And we know that there were many books and texts that were burnt or destroyed back in that time. It was all political. So there's an absence of any mentions of the testimonium by other Christian writers. So that shows you there that it was not